Hello again, everyone. Welcome to this week's 3D design activity brought to you by the Corona Public Library's Maker Exchange. My name is Mr. Martin, and today I'm showing you how to make a key/mail organizer for your wall. Let's get started. I've already got Tinkercad loaded up here. I've changed my project name to Key Organizer, and I've changed my snap grid to 0.25 millimeters. As usual, I'm going to select a box. Now, for the dimensions for this box, we want it to fit a piece of mail. And I measured a piece of mail that I had, and it's approximately, for example, an envelope is approximately 22 centimeters by 10 centimeters, or in this case, 220 millimeters. But you'll notice that that is still a bit too large. Oops, I accidentally displaced it there by 100 instead of changing the dimensions. Now, in order to rectify this, there's two ways. Now, we can simply click on the corner here and adjust each dimension manually. So if I wanted to cut it in half, I could just simply divide the number by 2. Or clicking on the corner and holding Shift keeps the aspect or the dimension ratio while we scale up or down. So there are two ways to do that. I prefer to enter things manually. It just makes it a lot quicker. And we're just going to line it up with this corner here because since we are using somewhat exact measurements today, we do want to make sure that our snap grid is lined up accordingly. So if I could just figure out how to zoom here, there we go. And keyboard controls, again, arrow keys, very useful. Just move it once along the grid and we're good to go. So the dimensions that I started with are actually still a little too small. If we're trying to fit mail inside of this object, we need to actually expand it by a bit. So I'm going to give us about a 5 millimeter leeway on each side. So I'm just going to make it about 120 by 60. So the reason I did that is because we're actually going to be cutting out material from the inside of this box, as you'll see in a bit. So cutting out material, if we have too much of it, it makes it easier to work with as opposed to having to exactly measure the complete inside of this object. So here, I'm simply adjusting this to be the length and width of a piece of mail. And now you can see why I did what I did. If I fit this box inside of the larger box, you can start to see how an envelope would actually fit inside of it. So now we have an actual envelope holder as opposed to an envelope replacement, so to speak. Now, you can try and eyeball the position that you're going to cut out, or you can use the alignment tool up top by selecting both and simply click on the axes that you want to align it with. So here I'm going to click align and make sure it is aligned vertically so that we have the same amount of material both at the front and at the back, or in this case the top or the bottom. I'm going to select the whole option for the middle box and making sure that I'm not going through the back of the object. I'm then going to group both of them, and you'll notice that it will cut out a nice slot for our mail to go into. And you select both, by the way, by holding Shift and just clicking on additional objects. And there we go. Now that you've got your mail slot figured out, well, what about the key organizer? So how do we go about adding hooks to the face of this object? So we have a few designs that we can choose from that are kind of pre-made already, but what we're going to do here is insert a round roof. So already you can see it kind of has a little hook shape, if only it were hollow. So let's go ahead and make it a little smaller, just because we don't really need it to be that large. It would be a good idea, by the way, to measure if you have any specific key rings, for example. If your key rings are a little smaller, you might want to adjust the size or the width of these to make sure it fits. But for now, I'm just going to show you the process without worrying too much about the size. So here, I changed the original to about 15 by 15. Here we have a 12 by 12. And what that's going to let me do now is slide this underneath the original, and simply adjusting the width and choosing whole for that object now lets me see what I'm going to be cutting out. And the solid that is remaining looks an awful lot like a hook. So here, just using the keyboard controls to make sure it's lined up properly, I can then adjust the shape to be totally customized. Again, I can choose the length of the hook, the width of the hook, so I have full control over that, and that's part of the reason why we teach you these skills. So there you go. We have a hook that we can now adjust and attach to the face of our object. Once you have it rotated and lined up, simply raise it up and move it on over to the face. Now you may need to move the camera around, zoom in, zoom out, do whatever you need to make sure it's lined up. Doesn't quite snap to it like we'd like, but here I do end up making it a little less wide. And I'm simply selecting and hitting Control C and Control V on Windows, Command C and Command V on Mac, and that lets me copy and paste all of these. And I want 5 of these going across. Now you'll notice they aren't exactly lined up just yet, and you'll see me do a little trick here in a second. So all I'm going to do is space them out according to how I want them. Say you wanted to hang an umbrella from this or hang a flashlight. Well, then you might need to adjust the spacing a little. But now I'm going to select all of them, and the alignment tool we used earlier comes in handy once again. There we go. So I just click the alignment along the one axis. If you try and align it along that axis, it's not going to quite work. But here we have them lined up. So I'm going to use the keyboard controls, which maintains the alignment, just to move them over to the spacing that I like. So now you can kind of see this whole project come together. We have hooks on the face. We have our mail slot in the back. We can select everything, group it together. And you'd think, okay, well, we're ready to print, right? Well, not quite. There's still some work to be done. In order to get this to print nicely, I'm actually going to rotate it 90 degrees and print it vertically. And that's just to make sure that this mail slot here will actually print from top or from bottom to top the way a 3D printer does. Otherwise, we'd have the whole front face hanging in midair, and the printer can't exactly print that. So here, we're actually going to undo our little hooks, since they too, depending on the printer you have, the definition or the quality that would print wouldn't quite work, since it's a very curved surface. So let's try and make a more straight hook just to ensure a good quality print here. So the same that I did with those curved ones, I'm going to insert an object and size it appropriately. And here, instead of inserting another one, I'm just going to copy and paste. Since we already have the dimensions that we want, I'm going to make one the hole, slide it over, make it a little wider just to make sure we do cut out the hole completely here. And now I can fully adjust the thickness of the hook or the loop that I'd like. And the reason I chose a more straight hook here, again, is just thinking about how it's going to print. The one that curves upwards away from the print bed is generally going to give us more issues than printing just a straight line here. So once I've got it lined up, I'm going to select both, group them, and there we go. We now have a fairly diagonal hook here. Slide it over to the face of the object. And the same thing that I did with the other curved hooks, I'm just going to copy paste them all and line them up. So here is just me figuring out, okay, well, I can choose the exact height, or I can simply line it up and use the camera to make sure it is indeed attached to the object. So I am still floating in midair here. I want to avoid that. And once again, the arrow keys are going to be very helpful here if you do want to line it up perfectly. That's the whole reason we do change our snap grid. And you can always use the camera angles to help you do that. So here I'm still using the mouse, but I'm going to get it to just about along the edge. And once I'm satisfied, I simply copy paste 4 more of these little hooks. So now simply make more copies, and the same way we did with the others, you can use the keyboard arrows to keep it lined up and simply drag it across. I find it a little faster to just use the mouse and then align them all once they're done. And I can even move them all 5 together if I have all of them selected. So here I did notice that we have a little bit of material hanging over one of the edges. So I'm just going to push these back a little bit. Again, I mostly just want to avoid any printing errors, which tends to occur when you have material hanging basically in midair. So same with the second one, and again, all of these, just kind of push them back a little. And just to reiterate, I did choose the quote-unquote more flatter hook here just to avoid issues with printing. If you wanted to keep those curved hooks from the beginning, then that would be totally fine. Most printers should be able to print those. But just to avoid issues here, we're going as simple as possible, just to show you the process. So there we go. We've got it lined up as we did the first. Select everything and group them because we're almost there, friends. So now we are just going to rotate it 90 degrees to get it upright, and we're almost ready for printing. So the first thing I'm going to do here is just make sure it is snapped onto our base or the work plane. I don't want any potential issues later when I go to import it to the slicing software. You can use the keyboard controls again, the arrow keys, you can use the mouse, you can use whatever you need to, just simply place it onto the work plane. And so now, this is kind of bland here. I want to be able to see the mail that is inside of the mail holder or the mail slot. And so there are two ways to do this here. The easiest way is to simply recreate the mail slot and then cut out a portion of it from that front face. Now here, I've adjusted the measurements to be, again, match what the mail slot is. And I'm simply going to rotate this 90 degrees. Once I do that, then I can simply bring it up to the face of my organizer here. And same thing as before, use the alignment tool. It's very useful here for making sure that we are centered. I'm going to shrink this down just a little. And you can see, okay, well, if I were to cut out this specific hole or this specific cutout, I'm going to use the alignment tool here just to make sure you get a better view of it. I would be left with a bar of material that goes across the top. Now, as with before, the reason we stood this up is to avoid any overhanging material. So if I were to cut this out, I'd still see that same issue. So all I'm going to do is bring this up to then cut out that top slip. One solution is to then recreate that bar using separate objects. But I'm pretty satisfied with how this looks like, and I think it'll hold the mail well enough. So let's start thinking about how we're going to hang it on the wall. And the last step here now is to think about, okay, how exactly is this going to attach to our wall? Well, if you have thumbtacks or nails already installed, it's as easy as inserting the cylinder here. Make sure that it is, we're going to make it wide enough, so about 8 millimeters here on each side. Rotate it 90 degrees. And now you can see how we're going to punch out a hole near the top. And the reason I chose the top is to just make sure that it does, I guess, hang well. If we choose anywhere near the bottom half of this object, if we load mail up on the top, well, it has a chance of falling, and I don't want that. So here, select hole. We can recreate another cylinder, or we just copy and paste, which is what I'm going to do. And simply drag it along to the other side. Now here, you could make sure that they are equidistant. You could make sure and line them up properly, which we're going to do here using the alignment tool. And again, if you wanted to, you can use the keyboard arrows to simply make sure they are equally spaced. For me, I have full control over the thumbtacks or the nails that I put in my wall, so again, I don't need it to be any specific spacing here. It's not going to be too heavy of an object. But there we go. We'll just delete the extra hooks, and we have our complete organizer now that we can print and hang on our wall. Do be aware that at the very beginning we did scale it down by about half, so when you do go to print, you want to make sure you scale it back up double. That way you have a mail slot that can actually fill or fit actual mail as opposed to just fitting half of an envelope. So that's it, folks. If you've enjoyed this video, we appreciate your views. Stick around for more content. We'll see you in the next video.